Hello and welcome to the AgCulture Podcast, where we share insights about the future of agriculture. Each week, we dive into the stories, technology, and ideas shaping a profitable and sustainable future for farms and rural communities alike. I'm Paul Windemuller, host of the AgCulture Podcast, and today we're going to be talking with Lisa Portas from the North Island of New Zealand. Now, Lisa is a fellow Nuffield Scholar, traveling around the world this year, studying her topic, which we'll get into in a moment. We had the privilege to host her and her family at our farm for a couple of days and have a little discussion about what she's passionate about, which is wool. Now, if you've been listening to my podcast for a while, you probably understand that I feel like New Zealand's kind of my second home. And when I have the opportunity to talk to a Kiwi that's visiting, I always take that opportunity and try to turn that into a podcast. But looking back on all the episodes we've done so far, I don't think we've ever done one specifically on wool. So I thought with Lisa's vast experience in the wool and sheep and beef industry in New Zealand, this would be a great opportunity to have an interesting discussion about what that looks like. And Lisa and her husband, Kurt, had operated a large sheep and beef station on the North Island of New Zealand for many years. And Lisa did a lot of the expansion of the market for that farm, specifically in the wool side of it, trying to find new uses, new markets, and ways to bring back more value out of the wool that they had from their farm. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the wool industry, some of the challenges that are happening in the wool industry over the last decade, specifically to New Zealand, and what she's studying for a topic, which is how to add value to the more coarse wool that's out there, or what's called strong wool. A lot of you might be familiar with the expansion and interest in Merino clothing, especially in the natural fibers realm of things. But there's a lot of strong wool that has been produced that really hasn't had a home in recent years because of the advent of synthetic fibers. So I think you'll find this conversation interesting, but we're also going to talk a little bit about her travels that she's done so far for her Nuffield Scholarship. For those of you that haven't heard about Nuffield in previous podcasts, I've done many podcasts with fellow Nuffield scholars. I'm a Nuffield scholar. Basically spend a year and a half traveling around the world, studying a topic and being able to go on farms and agribusinesses all around the world. So with that, we're going to get right into it. Please listen up and enjoy this episode with Lisa Portas. Lisa Portas, welcome to the podcast today in our big podcast studio here at Dreamwinds Dairy in Coopersville, Michigan.
That's awesome. Thank you for having me.
So you're coming from all the way from the North Island of New Zealand.
Yeah, down near Wellington, so the Wairarapa, which is known for sheep and beef farming, a bit of dairy, and a few wineries as well.
Yeah, and you're on your Nuffield journey right now in the midst of it, and you're a 2025 Nuffield Scholar, correct?
That's right. There's 4 of us from New Zealand this year. A couple of us have already completed our international group travel, and I'm here back in the States doing some of my independent travel, and I brought my family with me. We're spending a month moving across the States and doing a whole lot of different research. So it's awesome.
Yeah. And what is your topic that you're studying?
So my topic is around commodity products in New Zealand, but specifically strong wool, which is kind of 28, 29 micron and above. So traditionally used for carpet, not the merino stuff. And just how farmers can get a little more profit and cover the costs, basically. At the moment, the shearing bill is a little bit larger than what you'll get at auction. So
New Zealand is known for sheep and known for wool, right? And really during the beginning of the 20th century, it was a very, very prosperous time in the wool business. Oh, yeah. And then it kind of changed, right?
Yeah.
Talk through a little bit of the detail of that history and then some of the challenges that popped up to really change that industry.
Yeah, absolutely. My husband and I have been farming we've been in the Wairarapa farming for 16 and a half years. But prior to that, we hear so many stories about when the wool check was the big income earner. And we haven't seen that in our farming lifetime. But I guess, before the 80s, wool was a hero in New Zealand. We had infrastructure everywhere. We had so much of an industry taking place in New Zealand ready for export, but also consuming a lot ourselves. It was a no-brainer to have wool carpet or anything like that, and a big kind of wool knitting and textiles industry as well. But the same old story, kind of a little bit of synthetic creeping in, demand shifting. We move a lot of wool into China, historically and still today. And I guess that some of the fine wool took up some of that clip as well for them, and some of that purchasing behaviour moved to finer wools that were better suited to clothing. And then as a result, we've started to lose things like the wool board. Farmers in New Zealand voted that out and felt as though that wasn't serving them well enough. And at the time, the finances would have been hard to show that wasn't the case, I guess. Whether that was a right decision or a wrong decision is a tricky one to answer, I think. But yeah, you just saw a big shift in industry on the ground in New Zealand. Very hard to compete with product that can be made so cheaply and so quickly. Really changed the market, I think.
Yeah. I've seen this in a couple of instances as I've been traveling around for my Nuffield scholarship, and as well as in the U.S. in certain areas, when the industry loses a lot of value and doesn't have the finances to support the infrastructure, the sector just kind of implodes on itself very quickly. And I think that's probably what you're talking about in New Zealand, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think the other thing as well is that it's around the skills. We had so much infrastructure for so long and so many talented people. And now there are a number of commercial operators still in New Zealand and still really fighting the fight for scaled wool projects. But to bring skill in for the people who can run those machines and have the knowledge of engineering and even just how wool really works, I think we're almost in danger. I'd say we are in danger of having a generation that don't have those skills. So if the demand were to really come back, that's going to be another obstacle we have to look into. Obviously, technology is a great, solution for that. We can bring in, if you think about weaving, for example, you can bring in the old looms that need an engineer and you need to put the yarn on every single hook, or you can look to something that's a little bit more high tech and that kind of thing. But there's a cost that comes with that, and when the commodity price is low, when there's not a lot of demand, does it make sense to invest in that? And it's a heck of a decision to decide to invest and hope it'll come. So it's a tricky position to be in, I think, for infrastructure in New Zealand at the moment.
Yeah, and even on-farm infrastructure. When I was there this past January, I saw a lot of wool sheds that probably hadn't seen humans inside of them for a really long time, maybe some varmints, but other than that, probably not a lot. Right?
Absolutely. When we had the CSC, which is the conference for Nuffield, where all of the international scholars come to one country, this year that was in Auckland, and we had to do a bit of a 30-second, spiel on our topic. And one of the things that I raised in that was that, as a result of prices kind of coming down, and then all sorts of, wool isn't in isolation. That's a sheep farmer, right? And they have other decisions to make around meat and also around land use. And I think in New Zealand, wool is up against, farms going into trees for carbon. So some farmers have made the call to come out, and I don't blame them. It's pretty tricky out there at the moment. And then we've also seen some really good beef prices, and the idea that a little bit less labour going into the cattle, and that sheep can be a little bit labour intensive, the cost of shearing. So you're seeing some farmers shift their ratios as well. That's a bit of more of a temporary measure. You can bring those back. Right. So I'm always a bit more in favour of that. But of course, you've got people going to shedding sheep as well and deciding that wool shed can sit there for a little while and potentially have another use with agritourism maybe. But the shedding sheep are definitely, getting a bit more popular. And, these are businesses. It's really hard to, just because you love wool and it's been a part of your history and your family's history, you can't keep that line in red on the budget for too long. So, there's a lot of people out there being innovative, but as a commodity, it's a tricky one.
Yeah. And I think we've seen merino wool be kind of reinvented over the last 10 to 20 years. There's been a lot of great clothing brands that have really taken that on.
Absolutely.
That's one thing that I enjoy. I have a lot of merino stuff, especially after living in New Zealand.
Yeah.
But for the strong wool side of it, what opportunities do you see long term? Is there a comeback that can be made?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting. I think there's kind of two things at play with strong wool at the moment. One is we've had a lot of it for a long time. So supply and demand is always an interesting thing. And when, we're an exporting nation and when the rest of the world knows they can get copious amounts of this great wool for not too bad a price, it's probably not a great position for us to be sitting in at the bottom of the world. So I think with some of the things I just spoke about, you're seeing less kilos, less sheep. But with that, the price has started to shift upwards a little bit. So
the stockpile has started to be dwindled down a bit.
That's right. And I guess big buyers who are interested in coming for a certain tonnage and then go, oh, that's not available at this auction. That has everyone thinking. So that's, I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. I get nervous about saying whether we don't want it to dwindle too much, but I guess there's maybe a slight correction that could take place there. But also, there's some real dedication, and we're starting to see some movement, happily, even in policy in government in New Zealand, where, there are things that we can produce on the ground, and with a bit of support, we can move a lot more of that within our own borders. So things like prioritising New Zealand wool carpet into government buildings and schools and things like that just feels like an absolute no-brainer. So I'm hoping that we'll see a lot more of that coming in, and it's great to have that announced, but even better to see all of that really hitting the ground and get that carpet on the ground, I guess. But we are seeing, I guess people talk a little bit about a burning platform. Yeah, we're probably on that with strong wool at the moment. But with that comes so much innovation and people, taking it to task. And I think what you're seeing in New Zealand at the moment is two pockets, people who are out there with some support from the likes of MPI or different funds that we have. LOF is a great example. Sophie, who's from Waiheke Island, has taken strong wool and used that to create design-led homewares, so like lampshades and just really, she had a design background. And I guess just there's a lot of people looking at how can we could that be wool? How could we do that with wool? And I think that commands a great price point, which moves us into a really different mindset to carpet, so that's a really different. Carpet's great because that's scale,
there's a lot
and
of
repetitive,
that goes into
so that's perfect. But if we can be sitting in both places of kind of those everyday items and some real luxury items, I don't know that people resonate, strong wool with the luxury side. So if we can move into that, that's been a really great success story. And I had a little bit of involvement with that, and I was really, really proud to be involved in it. And also, we've got the likes of Wool Impact, Campaign for Wool in New Zealand. There's so many outfits that are out there educating our own nation, and then also spending time in innovative spaces too, and working with offshore companies and how can they specify New Zealand wool. And I think we've got a lot of things bubbling at the moment, and I think if even half of them come off, it's going to be okay. But I do see the private sector having a responsibility to kind of show some things being done, and I feel really really lucky to be sitting in with Nuffield and being able to go out and see where the rest of the world are getting this right or facing the same challenge, and maybe some of the levers they're pulling and bringing some of that back, because I think we have the same issues all over the world, and it's a great way to find solutions and talk to people who have maybe been there or are there and to see it differently. Yeah.
What are some of those examples that you've seen as you've been traveling around?
Yeah, I think probably one of the biggest ones for me has been from the environmental side, and sheep and cattle, ruminants have such a great role to play in regenerating the land. So we've been, Germany, there's been a lot of work here. I've learned yesterday about climate beneficial wool, where farms are being rewarded for some of the work they're doing and then being paid premiums for that wool, and then even getting assistance to move through that plan of making the land better. So I think when you add those things and realise that's part of wool growing, that's a really different system that we're talking about. So I've seen a few examples of that, which I've thought are really game changers, but also just that really innovative supply chain. I'm biased in that my previous role was taking wool through a direct supply chain and then even doing some export directly. But I do think that for some businesses, that's a real solution, being able to pull a product that a consumer elsewhere might need or want and package that up in a way that makes sense to them. Accreditations have a big part to play in that, which is always tricky. And I think probably one thing I've learned around the accreditations is that it's about picking the right one, but also picking the right partner, the people that you're looking to sell to, and making sure that if they're aligned with accreditations that suit their values rather than a trend, then
right.
You can give the farmer a bit of certainty, because there's nothing worse than a producer on the ground spending $5,000 on an accreditation, and then in 3 years' time, that's not the accreditation of the week. We've got to do something else now. If you can find that something that works for the motives on the farm, the values on the farm and that system, and what the brands are looking for, then you've got that happy place, I think. And I think that's an absolute opportunity, definitely.
Yeah. I guess one thing to look at is there a lot of tension between merino wool growers and strong wool growers? Are they pretty contentious, or is it pretty collaborative? That's
an interesting question. I think it's a tricky one for you putting me on the spot there, because I'm firmly in the strong wool camp as she wears her merino jumper for this interview. Look, I didn't point that out. I love merino. I think merino has done such a great job of marketing their story. And
was that from a brand perspective, or was that from just the product perspective?
I think there's been some brands that have done it really well. NZ Merino have done a fantastic job of really taking to the world this story. And I think, and it's a great story. And especially when you can wear it, and you can feel it, that we are such tactile people. The feeling of it is such a great part of it. And in reality, that's a tricky thing for strong wool to, when you're going 35 micron, it doesn't feel quite the same,
a little different experience.
Exactly. But the benefits are the same, the features are the same, and the good story about this being a renewable, amazing resource is the same. So I think there's some real synergies there where strong wool, people know these things about wool now. They might know that that's not the one they want to wear, but they get it. So, and again, I just think there's so much to be around, to be completed around asking that question, could this be wool? And, so much clothing is already sorted, but there's outerwear, so many blazers, jackets, beautiful outerwear and throws for the home, all that kind of thing. Doesn't have to be the softest wool, it can be a little bit up there. So, so I think there's room, and you're seeing a lot of wool businesses work in both, I think, as well, because there's just opportunity in products for across all of them. So I think there's probably been some green eyes over the fence, and I've stood up and spoke a few times about why we don't run merino. Where Kurt and I were farming for the last 16 years was very wet, but also very dry, and really we had a Romney breed, a strong wool breed, and that breed was perfect for that environment. The wool was not as soft as merino, and I joked that it would be great to have merino on that farm, but it wasn't the right place, for those kind of genetics. So, but on that, we are seeing, particularly, in the Wairarapa and other regions in New Zealand, a lot of work on keeping that meat yield in the sheep animal and bringing some finer micron into the genetics. So you're seeing people do that, but when we sit in a time when the wool is worth what it's worth, would you buy a ram at a couple of grand or more to test that? That's where it's tricky. It's that front-footing innovation again, right, and investing. So
when I was in New Zealand, I think you heard my New Zealand wrap-up episode. I was a little critical of New Zealand. I felt like I could be, because I feel like
you've
it's my
spent
second
time
home.
there. Yeah, you've spent enough time there to be able to say that.
Yeah, I've been there at least every 5 years over a 20-year period. So I got to see the country change and shift in good ways and bad ways. Yeah. And one of the things that I talked about on that episode was I thought New Zealand needs to try to value add at home more than what they have. Yeah. So, and you touched on it earlier about a lot of that infrastructure has gone away now. And what do you see if the industry, if you can build that market for that strong wool?
Oh yeah.
Is that going to be sending that wool as a commodity offshore to be processed in your mind, or do you think you can bring that infrastructure back and value add in New Zealand?
Absolutely. I think, if there was ever a gesture of do we want to keep doing more at home, after Cyclone Gabriel, we saw Woolworks, which is our national wool scour, completely rebuild into this state-of-the-art scouring facility. And we were lucky to be at the opening of that. And that was just, it was this really cool moment, I think, for wool in New Zealand where you went, right, this is worth millions of dollars. And it's a huge investment with technology. And this is here at this time. It has to be a statement of intent for our industry that we can do more here, because really a lot of wool will happily go out greasy out of New Zealand and off it goes. And where does it end up? So I think having industry kind of jump in and go, no, we're going to make sure we've got scale here and that we can do those things here. We've still got large scale spinning. We've still got large scale commercial weaving, and we can run night shifts on those places. We can really make a lot more happen. And that's just in the supply chain that I'm familiar with. Mm-hmm. But we are seeing, around the non-woven space, where you don't have to turn it into a yarn, where you can take scoured wool straight into a facility. I think we're seeing a lot more in there as well, which opens up, filtration. It opens up, insulation, all sorts of different things. So I think, again, it's kind of that crisis point, right? Where just all the ideas bubble up. And I think it's just supporting the right ones. And I guess it's a tricky thing. Funding is always a hard one to crack. And I'm glad I don't sit in the decision-making chair of what do we fund as well. So, but I think the intent's there, and I think there's some really great ideas coming through, and they are gaining traction. And there's private, companies on their own doing things as well. I don't know if it all needs to be done in New Zealand. I think that would help a lot. I mean, we've got, it's always tricky to find labour. We're not an inexpensive place to make things in New Zealand either. Power costs, building lease costs, things like that. Getting close to the ports and things to export a product. Your value of your land's likely to head upwards as well. So it's there's some challenges there, but I think at the very least, if we can add more steps at home, and even I do think there's some merit to finishing a product in a market as well, it
helps tell that story a little bit stronger, right?
And, I think about coming here, I've had the luxury of visiting and the privilege of visiting a number of American producers and, and listening to them talk about their lamb in the supermarkets. And then there's always a little, and your lamb's sitting there too, and oh man, and I've had to wear that these last couple of weeks being the New Zealand lamb producer over here. So, but that's, we feel the same in New Zealand. We see our product on the shelves and might see someone else's, oh man, so I think it's important that we remember that if we can find a way to either solve a problem for someone else and create a product that's good that they want to bring it in, and they love the story and the value that comes with it, or can we combine with industry elsewhere as well? And I think that's a really great bond between nations, and I think there's a lot of room for that as well. So I would see it being a balance of both of those things, and I do think we will probably keep some in the commodity space, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
No,
I think that
helps balance out the fluctuations that you have as an industry.
Absolutely, and hopefully the work being done in the innovative space and all of that in private space will see the commodity price raise as well. So that's my hope for it anyway. Yeah.
So let's get back to your Nuffield journey. So you've been on the road for a while. Yeah. You were in Michigan earlier this summer.
We were. Yes, thank you for hosting us. Our group had a fantastic time here. The US was definitely a highlight of our 5 weeks of traveling, of the dozen of us together. So
and I enjoyed being part of the group for a week.
Bringing back your Nuffield times.
So talk about some of the places that you visited and some of the experiences outside of wool that stood out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a little bit of a running joke on our 5-week tour. Is there any wool here? I was a little bit hard done by in some places, but we did get to see some wool, which was really nice. But I think one of the neat things for me on GFP was that, which is the 5 weeks of travel, obviously, and it was really neat because I wasn't going to see things that were specifically my topic. I was just quite open-minded and seeing all sorts of different things. So we went to, even here, when we were in Michigan, we saw this really great family who were doing just so much diversification and complete family business. Any obstacle that came at them, they had a solution. And I think for me, while there was no wool involved at all, it was all kind of dairy and doing beautiful cheeses, and we had these great taste testings, and Nuffield is so difficult sometimes, but no, it was a real privilege to go in and see their business and what they were doing. And even though that may not have been my particular topic, I think that mindset piece was a real takeaway for me, particularly from when we were in Michigan. Just seeing that real go-getter, just reminds you how much can be done and how differently you can look at things, which I think you can bring. Absolutely happy to bring that to the strong wool world. And then I guess the other things for me were around supply chain and just seeing that in different parts of industry. We saw a lot of that here. And we saw a lot of that in Germany as well. That was really interesting. Saw a sheep farm in Germany and understand they had a lot of environmental impacts and kind of systems on their sheep farm, which really helped keep it viable. So that was really interesting, and understanding the regulatory frameworks that they're working in the EU was quite different too. So yeah, that was really cool. But seeing the supply chain all over the world, I think you could just see where efficiencies and keeping things really tight. I'm always careful to say taking hands out of the middle, because those are there for a reason a lot of the time. If I think about wool, do farmers know the micron or the VM of their wool or the length of it and what it could potentially be used for? Sometimes not so much. So having someone in the middle who can either prepare it for sale, is always interesting. But anytime you can increase your own knowledge so that you can go direct to a market. We saw a lot of that in meat, in poultry and eggs and all sorts of different avenues. So that was a real takeaway from me, and probably reinforced something that I already felt strongly about, I think. And then, we went to the countries we traveled to were, Singapore, Indonesia. We went to United Arab Emirates, Germany, the States, and then finished in Mexico. And, we're an exporting nation in New Zealand. Yeah. So that's kind of the eyes that I see everything through. And just the real contrast between nations that are looking to feed themselves and looking for that food security piece, whether it's in Singapore because they don't have all of the land,
There's no land there, right?
We saw farming on a hotel rooftop, and things like that, which is just, again, just out the box feeling, thinking. It was pretty amazing. But you can understand why they're looking to science and research and things, because you have a pandemic and not all of the food's coming in, and what do you do? So, and then likewise, places like Indonesia, with a large population that they're looking to secure food for. And it was just really interesting, the things that were important around regulation or around process, whether you're looking to feed someone else and sell a product, or whether you are looking for certainty in your own nation. I found that came up a lot. Yeah. It was really interesting. Yeah.
Was that probably the biggest takeaway that you had that was kind of changed your mind on something, or was there something else that you saw that really shifted how you thought about a topic?
I think I spend a lot of time with accreditations and regulation, and I guess two things that stood out for me there was no one is happy with the amount of regulation that they have put on them. And it made me giggle sometimes, because if I made that into a bit of a spectrum and kind of where I thought people sat with how much regulation they had, the moral of the story is none of us are happy. We don't want to be told. No, but, and it was, everyone could kind of see that the regulation was there for a reason. But, everyone had challenges around that. So that was really interesting. But the other takeaway, I think, for me with accreditations was around the why and kind of where the demand for them was coming from, and whether someone was going to reimburse some of the costs associated with it. And a lot of the time I couldn't see that, as much as I would have liked to. There were some really great examples of kind of processes and systems that perhaps government was saying, hey, this is a place we should step into, and then support coming through that, which I thought was really great. But I think as far as just picking something and then aligning it with brands, I think it's really important to either find, almost like the super accreditation that just covers all the things, right? Rather than doing 3 to piece things together, soil carbon and animal welfare, and then different regenerative or environmental ones. I think I saw a couple of times where there were maybe buyers or brands who were pretty, happy that these products were coming in with these verifications and with these seals of approval. Maybe the price wasn't being reflected. It was just, that's great that it's got it. So that's
doing business almost.
Yeah, and when the farmer's facing high interest rates and poor commodity prices, and then the expectation of footing the bill for some of these things, that's pretty tricky.
Yeah.
So I think that was a big one for me. Is making sure those things we're doing on farm that we believe are of value and align with the values of the farmer. No brainer, but is there value coming down the line to keep that viable, you know?
So you're going to be wrapping up here shortly in the U.S.
I am.
And where are you heading from here?
Yeah, so I'll go home for 6 weeks and kind of make sense of all my notes and figure out everything I've, send some thank yous to everyone who's given me some time here. It's been fantastic. And then I've still got some more personal travel left. So the personal travel component is when we head out purely on our research topic, which is what I'm doing here. And I'll also go into the EU in September and October. So spend a little bit of time in Brussels, go to Germany and the Netherlands, and probably across to the UK for a little minute. So yeah, just go and see all of the world while we're out. But there's still some fibre production and obviously a lot of regulatory and accreditation and supply chain examples over in the EU that I'm interested to see. And hopefully some value coming back down the line to the farmers. So I'm interested to see some examples of that. And then I will spend some time in Australia later this year, probably in November, visiting some of my GFP crew, same in Europe as well. We'll catch up with them and then spend some time on the ground in Australia looking at soil carbon and just how they are monitoring that and how the government's involved in that as well in regulating. So that'll be quite interesting.
Sounds fascinating.
Sounds busy.
It sounds busy.
A few flight points coming through, but no, it's a heck of an opportunity. Whenever I talk to anyone about Nuffield, I always say, it's big, it is busy, and it's a wee bit of travel. But we were so fortunate to sit down with the cohort before us, and they said the same thing, and they just said, but it is life-changing, and I just can't argue that at all. It's been a heck of an experience. I think you learn a lot about yourself and a lot about the industry that we work in. It's been, and just meeting the most amazing people. It's been very cool. So.
Yeah, really opening a lot of doors to amazing relationships and
what a network,
people.
Right? It's pretty cool. So yeah.
Well, Lisa, thank you so much for sitting down for a few minutes on your busy travels through the U.S. Really appreciate it.
Very pleased to have been here. Thank you. It's nice to be asked.
Great having you. All right. Thanks once again for listening to another episode of the AgCulture Podcast. Really hope you enjoyed the conversation I had with Lisa. One other thing I just wanted to say, by the time this episode gets posted, I will be out again traveling around, mostly in the U.S., but also overseas a little bit as well. So check out my LinkedIn, my personal LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn at Paul Windemaller, or some of my other social media platforms, or the AgCulture Podcast social media. I'll be trying to keep up with posting on my travels as I tour throughout the U.S. and really hope you can glean some insights from the places I get a chance to visit. Also, while you're at it, if you could like, subscribe, and rate and review our podcast on whatever platform you're listening to this on, I would really appreciate that as well. And sharing the episodes really helps us grow our audience. We don't really do any marketing campaigns or anything like that. We've grown just through word of mouth and our audience sharing the episodes that we've put out with friends and family. So please If you are willing and you find value in this episode, share it with somebody that you know. So until next week, I'm Paul Windemaller. Thank you for listening to the AgCulture Podcast.